They let him die alone in the most expensive hospital in the city. 82 days abandoned in an ICU bed while the family fought over his inheritance. The only person who stayed was the one he had humiliated the most, and what she did for 8 months changed 2 lives in ways no one could ever imagine. It was a Tuesday in November when Richard Caldwell shouted at Maria Lopez for the last time. The 12th floor hallway of St. Raphael Medical Center shone so brightly you could see your own reflection on the floor. Each private room cost $30,000 a day. Doctors in perfectly pressed white coats rushed by. Nurses in spotless uniforms answered call after call. "You incompetent fool!" Richard's voice echoed through the entire hallway. "Look at this stain on the floor. It's like you've never seen a mop in your life." Maria was on her knees, scrubbing the same spot for the 3rd time. The stain Richard saw was just a reflection of the light, but she didn't dare contradict him. At 47 years old, an immigrant mother of 3, she needed that job more than her pride. "Mr. Caldwell, I've already cleaned this spot 3 times," she murmured, without raising her eyes. "3 times?" He leaned in, his face red with rage. "People like you should be grateful to even have a job, not talk back. Do you know how much I pay for insurance here? $200,000 a year? And I have to look at this pigsty?" Doctors stopped in the hallway. Nurses pretended to check charts. Everyone knew Richard Caldwell, owner of Caldwell Construction, the company that had built half of the city's luxury condos. At 58, he treated employees like personal property. "You know what?" Richard pulled his wallet out of his pocket. "You're fired, right now, in front of everyone. Let this be a lesson." The hallway went silent. Maria fumbled with her papers, hands trembling, but before she could get up from the floor, something strange happened to Richard. He clutched his chest, his face shifting from red to ashen gray in seconds, his eyes widening as if he'd seen something terrifying. His wallet slipped from his fingers, $100 bills scattering across the polished floor. Richard staggered backward, hit the wall, and began to slide down slowly, his mouth opening and closing without forming words. "Dr. Miller!" a nurse screamed, running down the hallway. "Code blue, 12th floor, code blue." Alarms blared through the hospital speakers as Richard collapsed completely, his heavy body hitting the ground with a dull thud that made everyone back away. Maria stayed frozen, watching the man who had just fired her convulse on the floor, white foam spilling from the corners of his mouth, his eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. In less than 30 seconds, the hallway turned into a medical battlefield. Dr. Miller rushed in with 3 more physicians. Nurses pushed an emergency cart. Someone tore open Richard's shirt, revealing a chest covered in graying hair. "Massive hemorrhagic stroke," Dr. Miller shouted after checking his pupils. "We need to get him to surgery now. Has anyone called the family?" One nurse was already on the phone, her hands trembling as she dialed. "His daughter is on her way. She lives 20 minutes from here. His son is in Chicago, flying back tonight." They lifted Richard onto the gurney with precise but urgent movements, his body limp like a rag doll, arms dangling, head tilted at an unnatural angle. Maria slowly stood up, still clutching her termination papers, and was shoved aside as the gurney sped toward the elevator. Blood began to trickle from Richard's nose, staining the white hospital sheet, leaving a trail of red drops on the floor she had just scrubbed. 20 minutes later, Patricia Caldwell stormed into the hospital. 32 years old, designer dress, high heels clicking against the floor, cell phone glued to her ear. "Brian, you need to come now. Dad had a stroke. They're operating on him." She didn't even notice Maria sitting in the corner, still in shock, still holding the papers. Soon after, Susan, the ex-wife, arrived, 53, face tightened by surgeries, fingers covered in gold rings. "Where is he? How's Richard?" Even divorced for 5 years, she still received $30,000 a month in alimony. The surgery lasted 7 hours. When Dr. Miller finally came out, exhausted, his surgical mask hanging around his neck, bloodstains on his coat, the entire family was waiting in the private lounge. Brian had just arrived from Chicago, his suit wrinkled from the trip. "We managed to stabilize him, but his condition is critical. Richard is in a deep coma, what we call a vegetative state. The stroke was extensive. It affected major areas of the brain. The next 72 hours are crucial." Patricia spoke first, wiping away a tear that didn't even fall. "Doctor, we'll do everything for my father, everything. Put him in the best room, hire the best specialists. Money is no issue." Brian nodded, phone in hand. "I'm already calling the top neurologist in New York. He only takes private cases, charges a fortune, but he's worth it." Susan stepped closer to the doctor, touching his arm with her perfectly manicured red nails. "Dr. Miller, Richard has the best insurance, doesn't he? That covers everything?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, far too tired to deal with finances. "Insurance covers part of it, but the special room you're requesting costs $30,000 per day. Then there are specialists, physical therapists, speech pathologists. We're looking at around $500,000 a month at minimum." The silence that followed was heavy, each of them calculating. Patricia exchanged glances with Brian, a silent conversation about inheritance and expenses. Of course," she finally said. "Dad has the resources. We'll take care of him." Over the next 3 days, the family put on a grand display of devotion. They rotated visits every hour, posted photos on social media asking for prayers, even hired a decorator to make the ICU room warmer with expensive flowers and family portraits. Maria watched it all from the hallway, still working at the hospital because her dismissal hadn't been made official. She saw Patricia crying for her phone camera, recording stories about how hard it all was. She saw Brian on calls with lawyers, asking about power of attorney and access to company accounts. She saw Susan arguing with administration about discounts on treatment. The first week passed, and Richard remained the same, lying in that costly bed, machines keeping him alive, tubes entering and exiting his body. Visits naturally decreased. Patricia showed up once a day, stayed 15 minutes, snapped a selfie, and left. Brian returned to Chicago, promising to come back over the weekend, but never did. Susan came on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, always at the same time, as if checking off a bureaucratic chore. By the second week, things worsened. The neurologist from New York charged $16,000 just for the initial consultation and said there wasn't much to do but wait. Patricia exploded on the phone with Brian. 16 grand just to say there's nothing to be done. You're insane for bringing in that quack. Visits dropped to 3 times a week, then 2. The $30,000 room was switched to one costing $10,000. The flowers stopped being replaced, the portraits were taken down. By the 3rd week, the unthinkable happened. No one came. Not Patricia, not Brian, not Susan. Nurses whispered that the family had stopped answering the hospital's calls. The bill had already surpassed $600,000 and kept climbing. On a rainy Thursday, Maria made the decision that would change everything. Her shift ended at 6 p.m., but instead of going home, she went up to Richard's room. She entered quietly, the sound of machines filling the silence. The man who had once been so powerful, so cruel, now looked small in that hospital bed, his face pale, beard growing unchecked, lips cracked. Maria pulled up a chair and sat by the bed. "Mr. Caldwell," she whispered, "I know you can't hear me. I know you fired me, that you treated me badly all these years, but no one deserves to die alone. No one." She took a damp cloth and gently wiped his face, the way she used to do for her own mother before she passed. "I'll stay here for a little while, each day, okay? I won't tell anyone. It'll be our secret." From that rainy night on, Maria created a routine no one at the hospital knew about. She finished her shift at 6, went to the locker room, changed out of her janitor's uniform into regular clothes, then quietly returned up the service stairs and slipped into Richard's room as if she were just another visitor. The night shift nurses assumed she was some distant relative, maybe a cousin the wealthy family never mentioned. No one questioned her because no one really cared about yet another vegetative patient abandoned by family. Maria brought small things in her worn-out purse: a comb to fix his hair, which was getting long and tangled, cheap lotion from the discount pharmacy to rub on his hands and feet, keeping his skin from cracking. A little battery-powered radio she tuned to a local folk music station, leaving it playing softly near his ear. "My mother always said music helps the soul find its way back," she whispered while massaging his arms in slow circles, trying to keep some circulation in those wasting muscles. Every single day she talked to him for exactly an hour, telling him the most ordinary details of life. "The bus was 20 minutes late today, Mr. Caldwell. The new driver doesn't know the route. Had to make a huge detour because of construction on Main Street." She spoke as if he could answer, pausing where he should have chimed in, smiling to herself when she imagined how he would have complained about such incompetence. "You would have been furious at that driver, huh? Said people like that shouldn't even have a license." After 3 weeks of her secret routine, Maria realized she was spending more time and money on Richard than she could afford. The lotion cost $6. Batteries for the radio, $3 a week. The extra bus fare to return later, $1.50 a day. By the end of the month, it added up to nearly $50 from her $900 salary, but she kept going, as if something deep inside her knew it mattered, that no one should be abandoned like that, not even someone who had been so cruel. It was on a Friday, nearly 2 months after the stroke, that Maria decided to confess her secret to Richard. Sitting in her usual chair, she began softly, as if revealing an old sin. "You know, Mr. Caldwell, I wasn't always a janitor. 25 years ago, I was in my 3rd year of nursing school, best student in my class at Florida State University. Professors used to say I had golden hands, that I was born to care for people." She paused, remembering a time when the future seemed so bright. "But then my father died suddenly, a massive heart attack out on the farm. My mother fell sick with grief, partial paralysis that only got worse. My brothers were all younger. The oldest was 15. I couldn't keep studying. I left everything behind and came to New York to survive. Cleaning was the only job I could get without a degree. During the 3 years she cared for her mother before she passed, Maria had learned physical therapy techniques by watching the professionals at the local clinic. She had observed how they moved paralyzed limbs, how they massaged to prevent muscle atrophy, how they stimulated circulation. She now applied all of that to Richard, bicycling his legs, flexing his arms, massaging his muscles with firm, precise pressure on points she knew would help. "My grandmother was a healer back in Camp Hill," Maria continued as she worked on the muscles in his legs. "She taught me about medicinal plants, about the power of words, about how faith can move mountains. You don't believe in that stuff, I know. You've always been a man of science, of numbers, of concrete and steel, but there are things you can't explain, only feel. She had begun bringing little sachets of herbs she made at home. Rosemary to help circulation, mint to freshen the air, lavender to soothe. She tucked small pouches under his pillow, changing them every 3 days. Another thing no one knew about Maria was her passion for languages. Over the years she spent cleaning while she scrubbed empty offices in the dead of night. She listened to audiobooks she borrowed from the public library. She learned basic English, became fluent in Spanish, and even picked up a little Italian. It's funny, Mr. Caldwell. You always thought I was dumb, that I knew nothing but how to mop floors. But I read to you in 3 different languages. Today I'll read a little Garcia Lorca in Spanish. They say that even in a deep coma, the brain processes familiar sounds. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday when the first sign happened. Maria had managed to trade shifts with a coworker that week so she could spend more time with Richard without arousing suspicion. She was reading aloud a newspaper piece about the construction sector's falling stocks when she saw it. His right index finger twitched. It was only a small spasm, but she saw it. Her heart started racing, but she kept her composure, kept reading as if nothing had happened, watching from the corner of her eye. 10 minutes later, it happened again. This time, it was the middle finger. A subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but definitely voluntary. Maria set the paper down and took his hand in hers. Mr. Caldwell, if you can hear me, try to move your finger again. Any finger. I'll wait. She sat holding his hand for 15 minutes that felt like 15 hours. Nothing. But she didn't give up. Every day after that, she spent at least half an hour holding his hand, talking, begging for any sign. On the 73rd day after the stroke, something extraordinary occurred. Maria was talking about how the price of beans had gone up at the market when a tear rolled down Richard's face. A single tear, sliding slowly down his right cheek. She almost cried out with joy, but she restrained herself. She took a handkerchief and gently wiped it away. I know you're in there, Mr. Caldwell. I know you're fighting to come back. That tear changed everything in Maria's mind. If Richard could cry, it meant he was processing emotions, that something inside him still worked beyond the machines. She began spending even more of her own money on things she thought might help. A eucalyptus essential oil that cost about $9, half of what she had for food that week. Vitamin E capsules she opened and applied to the pressure sores that were starting to appear despite the nursing care. Even a small used sound system she bought for about $17 at a junk shop to play classical music softly during the night. Money was so tight Maria began skipping lunch to save. She drank strong coffee in the morning, brought a tiny container with rice and an egg that she ate around 10 at night after tending to Richard. She lost 15 pounds in 2 months. Her clothes hung loose, but she didn't care. I needed the diet anyway, she joked to herself while tightening the belt that now required an extra hole. One early Thursday morning, Maria was asleep in the chair beside the bed when voices in the hallway woke her. She immediately recognized Patricia's shrill tone. I want to see my father now. I don't care what time it is. The door opened and Patricia entered, flanked by Brian and 2 men in suits who looked like lawyers. Maria rose quickly, trying to seem invisible, but Patricia noticed her right away. What is this cleaner doing here? This isn't cleaning hours. Brian approached Maria with an unfriendly face. Are you stealing something? Taking advantage while my father is helpless? Maria felt her blood boil but kept her head down, the way she'd learned the wealthy liked. No, sir. I was just checking if anything needed cleaning. I'll leave right away. She grabbed her bag and stepped out quickly but stayed in the corridor to listen. "We need to decide this now," one of the lawyers said. "The cost is $2,300,000. Insurance covers nothing more. If you want to turn off the machines, it has to be a unanimous family decision." $2,300,000! Patricia almost screamed. "That's half of what he has in liquid assets." If this continues, there will be nothing left of the inheritance. Brian fiddled with his phone, doing the math. Each day costs nearly $28,000 all included. In 3 months, it eats through the liquid assets. Then we'll have to start selling properties, and that takes time, depreciates value. The silence that followed was heavy. Maria pressed her ear closer to the door. "How long can he live like this?" Patricia asked. "Doctors said it can be years," the lawyer replied. "With appropriate care, vegetative patients can live for decades." "Decades!" Brian exploded. "We're going to spend the whole family fortune keeping a vegetable alive? That's insane!" "Then it's decided," Patricia said coldly. "We'll file for court authorization to withdraw life support. We'll claim it's his presumed wish that he wouldn't want to live like this. In 15 days, we'll have approval." Maria clamped a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. 15 days. They were going to kill Richard in 15 days for money. She ran down the service stairs, tears streaming, heart tight as if it would burst. That same night, Maria made a desperate decision. If they only gave her 15 days, she would try everything she knew. She stopped by the discount market in the early morning and spent her last $60, everything she had, on ingredients her grandmother used: fresh ginger, pure honey, propolis, Sicilian lemon. She prepared a mixture following the old recipe she'd learned as a child, a concoction her grandmother said could wake even the dead. Of course, Richard couldn't drink it, but she could apply it to his lips, his temples, his wrists, spots where the skin absorbed better. For the next 5 days, Maria barely slept. She worked all day as a cleaner, rushed home to prepare oils and mixtures, then returned to the hospital at night. She talked to Richard nonstop, pleading with him to come back. "Mr. Caldwell, your family wants to turn off the machines. They want to kill you for money. You have to wake up. You have to show you're alive. Please, I know you're in there. Come back. For God's sake, come back." On the 6th day, at 3:42 a.m., while Maria massaged his feet with rosemary and lavender oil, it happened. Richard opened his eyes. It wasn't a slow, drowsy opening. It was sudden, like someone waking from a nightmare. His brown eyes, closed for 93 days, opened fully and fixed on Maria. She froze, her hand still resting on his foot, unsure if it was real or if she was sleepwalking from exhaustion. "Mr. Caldwell," Maria whispered, afraid any sudden movement would make him close his eyes again. "Can you hear me? If you can, blink once." The seconds stretched into eternities. Then, slowly, deliberately, Richard blinked. Once. Maria felt her legs give out and had to steady herself on the bed to avoid collapsing. "Oh my God, you're back. You're here." Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably, dripping onto the white hospital blanket. Richard tried to move his lips, but only a hoarse, unintelligible sound came out, as if his vocal cords had forgotten how to work after so long of silence. Maria fetched a cup of water and a cotton swab, moistened it, and dabbed his parched lips. "Don't try to speak yet. Your body has to relearn everything. But you're alive. You're conscious. This is a miracle." She wanted to shout, call the doctors, tell the whole world, but something held her back. If the family knew he was waking, what would they do? Would they care for him or hurry to switch off the machines before he could make his own decisions? For the next 3 hours, Maria stayed there, holding Richard's hand, watching him struggle to keep his eyes open, blinking answers to simple questions. Do you remember me? Blink once for yes. A blink. Do you remember the stroke? A blink. Do you know how long you've been here? 2 blinks. No. 93 days, Mr. Caldwell, 3 whole months. His eyes widened in shock, and another tear fell, this one born of pure terror. When dawn broke, Richard finally formed the first word. It came weak and hoarse, but unmistakably her name. Maria. She squeezed his hand so hard she could hardly breathe. Then he said something that chilled her to the bone. I heard everything. Each word was a struggle, but he was determined to speak. Maria stopped breathing. Everything? You mean... Richard blinked once. Yes, he had heard it all. The implications were devastating. Richard had heard the family discussing the inheritance while he fought to live. He had heard his children calculating how much it cost to keep him alive. He had heard the plan to turn off the machines. But he had also heard every word Maria had spoken, every story she told, every confession about her life, every song she hummed, every prayer she whispered, asking him to come back. You stayed with me, he managed to say after several attempts, his voice gaining strength little by little. Everyone left. You stayed. Richard began to cry properly now. Not a single tear, but deep sobs that made his frail body shake. The man who had been so hard, so cruel, so powerful, now sobbed like a child in the arms of the cleaner he had humiliated so many times. Maria wiped his face gently, the way she used to with her own children when they were small. I couldn't leave you alone. No one deserves to die alone, not even... She stopped, and Richard finished with visible effort. Not even someone like me. His voice grew clearer with each passing minute, as if each word helped the next one find its way. You really heard everything? All my conversations? Maria asked, suddenly embarrassed by the personal things she had shared. Richard made a huge effort to speak more. You cared for me, like you cared for your mother. I heard about the nursing care, about your life, about everything you lost. When hurried footsteps in the hallway announced someone's arrival, the sun was already high. Maria recognized Patricia's heel click before she entered. Dad! Patricia cried when she saw Richard with his eyes open. The shock on her face was genuine, but it quickly shifted into something that looked more calculated than joyful. You woke up. This is incredible. Brian, get in here now. She shouted down the hall while grabbing her phone to call her brother. Within minutes, the room was packed. Brian arrived breathless. Susan turned up with the lawyers. Doctors were summoned in a hurry. Everyone talked at once, asking questions, checking vital signs, discussing medical and legal implications. No one noticed Maria sliding toward the corner, trying to slip out unnoticed, until Richard raised his trembling hand and pointed at her. Maria stays. His voice was still hoarse, but the command was clear. Patricia looked from Richard to Maria, bewildered. Dad, that's the cleaner. What is she doing here? Brian was more blunt. She has nothing to do with this. Security. Remove her. But Richard slammed his fist on the bed with all the strength he could muster. Not much, but the gesture was understood. She stays. This time it came louder, clearer. Dr. Miller, who had just arrived, examined Richard carefully. Mr. Caldwell, do you know where you are? Do you know who these people are? Richard looked straight at the doctor and replied with increasing clarity. St. Raphael Medical Center. Those are my children who wanted to kill me. Silence in the room, was absolute. Patricia went pale. Brian let his phone drop to the floor. Susan took a step back as if slapped. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Patricia tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. "It must be coma confusion. Doctor, is this normal?" Richard drew a deep breath, gathering strength. When he spoke, each word landed like a blow. "I heard everything. Every word about the $2,300,000. About the 15 days to turn off the machines." Each sentence dropped like a bomb in the room. Brian tried to step closer. "Dad, you don't understand. We were worried about your suffering. We didn't want you to live like a vegetable." "Lies!" The word burst out with surprising force. "You only wanted money. Maria stayed. Maria cared. You disappeared." Tears streamed down his face again. 82 days alone. Only she stayed. Patricia tried to approach her father, but he turned his face when she reached for his hand. "Dad, please, you have to understand. We were desperate. The doctors said you wouldn't wake up." Richard looked at her with a deep sadness in his eyes. "The doctors said I could live for years. You're the ones who decided it wasn't worth the money." Brian was red with anger, pacing the room. "And this cleaner? What's she getting out of all this? She must be expecting a fat reward now that you woke up." Maria answered, her voice calm but steady. "I don't want anything from Mr. Caldwell. I only did what was right. Now that he's awake and the family is here, I can go back to my regular work." She started toward the door, but Richard managed to speak louder. "Dr. Miller, call my attorneys, the real ones, not these. I want Mr. Henry Fields here in an hour." The doctor hesitated, glancing at the family. "Mr. Caldwell, it might be best to rest first. You just came out of a 3-month coma." Richard shook his head with resolve. 3 months listening to my family plan my death. I won't wait another minute. Call Mr. Fields now." His tone left no room for debate. An hour later, attorney Henry Fields entered with his team. The Caldwell family's lawyer for 30 years, he had known Richard since he started the company. "Richard, my friend, what a joy to see you awake. What's so urgent?" Richard looked around the room where the tense family still stood. "Henry, I want to change my will, now, with witnesses, everything filmed and recorded." Silence shattered under Patricia's scream. "Dad, you can't do this. You just woke up. You're not thinking clearly." Brian was harsher. "This is that woman's influence. She manipulated you while you were vulnerable." Richard raised a hand for silence. "Henry, first I want to establish a foundation. $20 million for caregivers of abandoned seniors. Maria Lopez will be chair of the board." Maria nearly stumbled back in shock. "Mr. Caldwell, no! I don't know anything about foundations or management. I'm just a cleaner." Richard smiled for the first time since waking, a weak but genuine smile. "You know how to care for people. That's all a foundation like this needs. Henry will handle the paperwork." The lawyer scribbled quickly. "And the rest of the estate, Richard? My children will receive a monthly stipend of $10,000 each, enough to live with dignity, not luxury. The rest goes into an endowment for the foundation. The company will be sold and the proceeds used to build 3 care homes providing free services to seniors with no family." Brian exploded, lunging toward his father's bed. "You've lost your mind. You can't do this to us. We're your children." Hospital security had to hold him back. Richard looked at Brian and Patricia with a mixture of sorrow and disappointment. "You are my children biologically. But these last 3 months, the one who acted like family was Maria. She held my hand. She talked to me. She didn't let me die alone. Patricia was crying now, but they were tears of anger, not grief. We'll fight this in court. You were in a coma. You're not mentally fit to make decisions. Dr. Miller spoke up. I can attest that Mr. Caldwell is fully lucid. All neurological tests show he is in full mental capacity. Attorney Fields added, and we have everything recorded with witnesses. It will be impossible to contest. As the family left the room shouting, promising endless legal battles, Maria stepped closer to Richard. Sir, are you sure about this? They're your family, your blood. Richard took her hand, the same hand he had held through so many lonely nights. Maria, you taught me what real family is. Family is the one who stays when everyone else leaves. 6 months later, Richard sat in the garden of the first home opened by the Renewal Foundation, the name Maria had chosen. He still used a walker, a stroke after effect, but he had regained almost all of his speech and movement. Maria stood beside him, not in a cleaner's uniform, but in a white coat. She had gone back to nursing school on a full scholarship, finally pursuing the dream interrupted 25 years ago. I never thought I'd see this day, she said, watching the first seniors being welcomed into the home. They were people abandoned in public hospitals, with no family, no resources, no hope. Now they would have a dignified place to live out their final years. Do you know how many requests for placement we've already received? Maria asked, flipping through a folder. 340 in just 1 week. So many people need help. Richard nodded, a new determination in his eyes. We'll build more homes. I sold the penthouse yesterday. Another $15 million to the foundation. Maria looked at him, concerned. And where will you live? Richard smiled, a true smile that transformed his face. There's a room for me here on the 2nd floor. Simple, but with everything I need, and more importantly, close to people who truly care. Life had come full circle. The man who had humiliated a cleaner, who had treated employees like objects, who measured people's worth by their money, now lived simply and found joy in helping others. Patricia and Brian had vanished after losing every court case. Occasionally, they sent messages asking for money, which Richard ignored. The family he had now was different. It was Maria, who visited every day after classes. It was the other residents who played dominoes with him on Sunday afternoons. It was little Maya, the 5-year-old daughter of one of the caregivers, who called him Grandpa and climbed into his lap to hear stories. That evening, as the sun set on the horizon, Richard took Maria's hand once more. Thank you, he said simply, for not giving up on me when I had given up on myself. Maria squeezed his hand back. Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Caldwell, even those who don't believe they do. And so, the millionaire who had been abandoned in a vegetative state discovered that the greatest wealth wasn't in a bank account, but in the genuine care of someone who chose to stay when everyone else walked away.